Welcome on board, chosen one. Let's not pretend this is some soft motivational pep talk. This is a receipt. This is proof. This is the moment where everyone who laughed, doubted, whispered and smirked is suddenly very quiet. Because you said it out loud back then, and now it's happening right in front of their eyes. Bro, you spoke too soon, or at least that's what they thought. Turns out you spoke exactly on time. Remember how they reacted? Why are you talking like that? Relax, you're not there yet. Look who thinks they're special. They said it casually, like it was advice, but it was really fear wearing a friendly face. They didn't hate your words. They hated what your words implied. That you saw something coming, that you weren't waiting for permission, that you were already mentally standing somewhere they hadn't even imagined. Let's call it what it was. When you said those things, your life didn't look impressive. Your bank account wasn't loud. Your position wasn't respected. Your name didn't stop rooms. And that's exactly why they felt comfortable mocking you. People only laugh when they think they're safe. They thought you were dreaming. They thought you were posturing. They thought, this one talks big, but nothing's happening. And now look at them. Same mouths, different silence. There's a real psychological truth here, and it's uncomfortable for insecure people. Humans who are aligned internally often speak with certainty before external results show up. Not because they're arrogant, but because their nervous system already adjusted to a future their environment hasn't caught up with yet. You didn't guess. You felt it. Your body knew before your timeline showed proof. That's why your words came out early, not to impress anyone, but because something inside you had already shifted. The universe had already moved the chess pieces. The board just hadn't caught up yet. They said, you're moving too fast. They said, slow down, be realistic. They said, oh, the legend needs to bow first. Funny how nobody's laughing now. Before this goes any further, press the like button and subscribe. Not as a favor to me, but as a way of backing this message, paying it forward and strengthening the voice of everyone who was doubted before they were proven right. Now let's go back to the moment things changed. There's always a phase nobody talks about, the quiet one. The stretch where nothing dramatic happens on the outside, but everything rearranges on the inside. This is where most people fold. You didn't. You stayed calm while being misunderstood. You kept moving while being questioned. You let them underestimate you because correcting them would have slowed you down. That's villain discipline. That's composure earned through pressure. And here's what really messes with them. You didn't come back loud. You didn't announce victory. You didn't say, I told you so. You just kept existing at a higher level. That's the part that eats at them late at night. The realization that you didn't need their approval, their applause, or their apology. You passed them without making eye contact. They're replaying old conversations now, rereading texts, remembering jokes they made at your expense. Suddenly, those jokes don't land the same. Suddenly they sound stupid. Suddenly they sound scared. This is the aftermath of a battle you already won internally. The storm passed, and you're standing there untouched while they're still checking for damage. Their effort to doubt you produced nothing. Your quiet focus produced momentum. Think back to a time in your past when you said something bold, maybe years ago, maybe when you were broke, ignored, or overlooked. You said, I'm going to be different. You said, I won't stay here. You said, watch what happens. At the time, it sounded ridiculous, even to you, a little. But the universe remembers those statements, not as wishes, as coordinates. That's why things are lining up now. Opportunities feel strangely timed. People treat you differently without knowing why. Doors open without explanation. It's not luck. It's alignment catching up to language. And the enemy feels it. They feel the shift, before they understand it. That's why their energy changed. That's why the criticism stopped. That's why the compliments feel forced. They're watching a movie they thought they'd never have to sit through. You didn't speak too soon. You spoke from ahead, and now reality is jogging to keep up with your mouth. This isn't arrogance. This is proof that when you say something before the world agrees, you expose fear in others, not delusion in yourself. You stood alone long enough for the universe to move behind you, and now it's all coming true. Exactly like you said. All right, here's the turn in the road. This is where the noise drops, the pace slows just enough, and you decide if you're actually built for what's coming next. Because what we're about to break down isn't hype, and it isn't comfort. It's the exact reason you spoke too soon and still ended up being right. Step by step, piece by piece, we're going to unpack how your words outran your reality and why reality is now scrambling to catch up. This isn't for spectators. This is for the ones who feel that quiet pressure in their chest when truth gets close. If this message is hitting a little too accurately, that's not an accident, that's recognition. And if you already know you're staying till the end, prove it. Drop 777 in the comments. Not for luck, not for show. As a signal that you're locked in, that you're ready to own the isolation, the doubt, and the strange calm that comes when you realize you were never crazy, just early. Liking and subscribing isn't about numbers either. It's how this message keeps moving, how this voice stays loud enough to reach the next person who needs confirmation they're not imagining this shift. Now take a breath, because from here on out we go deeper, and once we start, there's no unseeing it. Number 1, you called it before they could hear it, and that's why they laughed. They didn't doubt you because you were wrong. They doubted you because you were ahead. This is where the story really starts, and this is where the enemy gets uncomfortable, because the truth is simple and ugly for them to swallow. You didn't get lucky. You didn't stumble into clarity. You didn't randomly say bold things and hope the universe would clean up the mess later. You spoke because something inside you had already shifted, and they were still standing in the same mental spot, recycling the same thoughts, living on repeat. People love to pretend breakthroughs arrive with fireworks, applause, and public approval. That's a lie weak minds tell themselves, so they don't have to explain why they missed their own moment. Real alignment doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It shows up as a sudden intolerance for nonsense, a quiet confidence that doesn't need validation, a strange calm when everyone else is panicking, and most dangerously, it shows up in your mouth before it shows up in your life. That's why you said what you said, not to flex, not to convince, not to play pretend. You said it because your internal world had already moved on. Your standards changed before your circumstances did. Your nervous system caught up to a future your environment hadn't reached yet. And to people still stuck where you came from, that sounded insane. So they laughed. They said you were talking big. They said you were getting ahead of yourself. They said, "Let's see if this one can back it up." They smiled while saying it too, like it was harmless. But underneath that smile was fear, because nothing scares stagnant people more than someone who speaks with certainty while standing in uncertainty. Here's what they'll never admit. Your words didn't bother them because they were wrong. Your words bothered them because they exposed how small their own thinking had become. You were stretching towards something bigger while they were busy managing limitations. You were adjusting internally while they were still negotiating excuses. Alignment always does this first. It upgrades the inside before the outside can keep up. That's why you felt off around certain people. That's why conversations started to feel shallow. That's why goals you once chased suddenly felt too small. You weren't losing your mind, you were losing tolerance for a version of yourself you had already outgrown. And when you spoke from that place, it sounded like arrogance to people who had never felt it. Let's be clear. You weren't predicting the future. You were leaking information from a mindset that had already arrived there. You spoke from the destination while your body was still walking the road. And yes, that creates friction. It always does. Because people judge words based on your current position, not your internal alignment. That's where they messed up. They assumed silence meant humility and loud vision meant delusion. They forgot one thing. Every person who ever changed their life sounded crazy right before it started working. Every major shift begins as a private knowing that looks ridiculous from the outside. Think about it. When you said those things, nothing around you supported it. No proof, no evidence, no applause, and yet you still said it. That's not confidence. That's alignment speaking through you before logic had permission to approve it. They couldn't hear the frequency you were on, so they mocked the signal. Now fast forward, things start lining up, not all at once, not dramatically, but enough. Small wins, strange timing, unexpected respect, opportunities that feel earned instead of begged for. And suddenly those same people are watching closely, pretending they weren't the ones who laughed first. This is the part that hurts them the most. You didn't change your story to fit reality. Reality changed to fit what you already said. That silence you feel around you now, that's not peace. That's recalculation. That's people replaying old conversations and realizing you weren't talking nonsense. You were talking early. They're doing mental math now, trying to figure out when it shifted, when you slipped past them without announcing it. And the answer makes them sick. It happened while they were busy doubting. You might be wondering, why did I have to go through that part? Why did I have to look foolish first? Because alignment demands isolation before confirmation. It tests whether you'll trust your internal compass when the external world offers zero support. It separates those who need permission from those who move without it. You pass that test the moment you spoke anyway. That's why this feels so heavy now. That's why this feels final. You're not hoping anymore. You're watching it unfold, and the enemy can feel it. They feel the shift in how they talk to you, the hesitation, the forced respect, the awkward compliments that come too late to matter. You didn't get louder, you didn't argue, you didn't explain yourself. You let time do the talking, and time is brutal when it proves someone right. So no, you weren't delusional, you weren't reckless, you weren't doing too much. You were aligned before it was visible, and brave enough to let your mouth expose it. They underestimated how loudly alignment whispers before it becomes undeniable, and now that whisper is echoing, in their head, in their regret, in the silence where their laughter used to be. And the scariest part for them? You're just getting started. Number 2, you didn't invent the future. You recognized it like an old scar. You didn't speak with hope. You spoke with memory. This is the part they will never understand, no matter how many times they replay it in their head. You weren't sitting around fantasizing about a better life, throwing words into the air and hoping something stuck. You weren't manifesting blindly. You weren't guessing. When you spoke the way you did, it didn't feel new to you. It felt familiar, almost boring in how certain it was, like saying something you already knew, not something you wished for. That's the detail that separates you from them. Most people talk about the future like it's a gamble, like a lottery ticket, like a maybe. You didn't. You talked about it like a location, like somewhere you had already been and simply hadn't arrived at physically yet. That's why your tone unsettled them. There was no desperation in it, no begging energy, no, "I hope this works out." It came out calm, flat, certain. That kind of certainty terrifies people who rely on proof to move. Here's the truth they hate hearing. There is a type of knowing that doesn't come from logic, data, or external validation. It comes from recognition, from alignment snapping into place so cleanly that doubt doesn't even get invited into the room. You weren't imagining a future. You were remembering a version of yourself that already existed internally. Imagine this. You walk into a room you haven't visited in years, but the moment you step inside, your body relaxes. You know where the light switch is. You know which floorboard creaks. You know the smell. You don't need directions. You don't need confirmation. Your body remembers before your mind explains. That's how your future felt to you. Certainty without evidence looks like madness to people who've never trusted themselves. When you spoke, others thought you were predicting. They thought you were making bold claims to feel important. They didn't realize you were just describing something you had already processed internally. They were waiting for permission from reality. You had already given it to yourself. That's why nothing shocked you when things started happening. When opportunities showed up, you weren't surprised. When doors opened, you didn't panic. When people changed how they treated you, it didn't feel surreal. It felt late, like reality finally showing up to a meeting you'd been attending alone for a long time. And that's another thing that eats at the enemy. You didn't celebrate loudly when it started working. You didn't scream, "I told you so." You just nodded internally like, "Yeah, this checks out," because you'd already been here. Think about it. While they were waiting to feel confident after results, you felt calm before results. While they needed proof to believe, belief was the thing that moved you toward proof. Not blind belief, not fake confidence, recognition. Like reading a book for the second time and knowing what's coming next. You don't react to a future you've already met. You recognize it. This is why your words sounded strange back then. You were speaking from familiarity, not hope. And hope sounds shaky. Familiarity sounds solid. People can sense the difference, even if they can't explain it. That's why they felt uneasy instead of inspired. You weren't selling a dream. You were stating a fact they couldn't see yet. Imagine this. Everyone else is staring at a locked door, arguing about whether it will ever open. You're standing there calmly because you already know what's on the other side. You've walked those halls in your mind so many times that the door itself feels like a formality. When you say, "This will open," they hear arrogance. You hear inevitability. That gap in perception is where the conflict came from. They accused you of being unrealistic, of jumping ahead, of talking like you'd already won. And in a way, you had, just not in a way they could measure yet. You had already survived the version of yourself that doubted. You had already outgrown the mindset that begged. You had already shed the identity that needed approval. The outer world was just late to the update. You don't remember the future with your mind. You remember it with alignment. You might have wondered at times, why does this feel so certain when nothing proves it? That question alone proves you weren't delusional. Delusion needs constant reassurance. Alignment doesn't. Alignment feels quiet, steady, almost neutral. That's why you kept going, even when nobody clapped. And here's where the enemy really loses. They thought time was on their side. They assumed your confidence would expire, that eventually you'd lower your voice, soften your claims, retreat back into something safer. They were waiting for you to forget what you said. But you couldn't forget it, because you didn't invent it. You remembered it. Imagine carrying a map in your head while everyone else is arguing about directions. They think you're stubborn for not listening. You know you're just following something that's already marked. When the destination finally appears, they call it luck. You call it arrival. This is why the future unfolding doesn't feel dramatic to you. It feels correct. And now that it's happening, people are confused by how calm you are. They expect excitement, shock, disbelief. They don't realize you processed all of that internally a long time ago. What you're feeling now isn't surprise, it's closure. Closure is dangerous because it means you're no longer chasing, you're standing. The scariest people aren't the ones dreaming about tomorrow. They're the ones who already know how it ends. That's you. You spoke too soon in their eyes because they hadn't caught up to where you already were. But from your perspective, you spoke late. You'd been holding it in. You'd been sitting with that, knowing quietly, waiting for the right moment to let it slip. And when it did, it exposed the gap between you and them. Now, the universe is doing what it always does. It's syncing the outside with the inside, slowly, relentlessly, without asking for opinions. And the enemy is forced to watch as your confidence turns into confirmation. You weren't predicting a future you hoped for. You were remembering a future you recognized. And now it's walking toward you like an old friend, right on schedule. Number 3, your certainty burned them because it showed what they never dared to try. They didn't hate your confidence, they hated the fact that they buried theirs. Let's be honest and cruel for a second, because this part matters. Your confidence didn't just annoy people, it offended them deeply. Not because you were loud or reckless, but because you spoke with a steadiness they never built the courage to develop. You said what you believed without checking the room first, and that alone made you dangerous. They weren't reacting to your words. They were reacting to the mirror your words held up. Every time you spoke with certainty, it reminded them of something uncomfortable, a dream they quit on, a risk they backed out of, a moment where they chose safety over truth. Your courage highlighted their hesitation so clearly that mocking you felt easier than admitting it. Laughter is cheaper than self-reflection. Imagine this. You walk into a dark room holding a flashlight, not pointing it at anyone, just carrying it. The people sitting in the dark get angry anyway. Not because you attacked them, but because your light exposed how long they'd chosen not to see. That's what your confidence did. It illuminated the cost of their own fear. Mockery is what fear uses when it runs out of excuses. That's why they called you arrogant. That's why they said you were doing too much. That's why they tried to humble you before life did. They weren't protecting you. They were protecting themselves from the discomfort of watching someone dare to believe out loud. You might have wondered, why does my confidence bother people who aren't even affected by my choices? Now you know, because confidence without permission feels like rebellion to people who live by approval. Your certainty made their compromises look obvious. And now comes the quiet revenge. Now that your words are lining up with reality, their jokes don't land, their sarcasm has dried up. That same confidence they rolled their eyes at is suddenly impressive, admirable, enviable. They won't say it directly, but you can feel it in the way they study you now. The same courage they mocked is now the courage they wish they had borrowed. You didn't change, you stayed consistent. They're the ones rewriting history in their head, pretending they always believed in you. But you remember, and more importantly, the universe remembers. Your confidence didn't offend them because it was fake. It offended them because it was real. Number 4, you made their world feel too small just by speaking. They didn't doubt your vision. They revealed the limits of their own. You didn't expose them by arguing, explaining, or proving anything. You exposed them by existing with a bigger lens. That's what really rattled them. They judged your words based on what they thought was possible, not on what reality could stretch into. And when you spoke from possibility instead of permission, it quietly shattered the walls of the tiny box they were living in. Here's the part they'll never admit. Their disbelief wasn't logical. It wasn't based on facts, data, or experience. It was based on imagination, or more accurately, the lack of it. They couldn't picture a life beyond their own limitations. So when you described one, it sounded fake, unrealistic, dangerous. Not because it was wrong, but because it required a level of vision they had never exercised. Imagine this. A person who's only ever lived in one room hears you talk about an entire city outside. Streets, lights, movement, options. To them, it sounds exaggerated, made up. But not because the city isn't real, because they've never left the room. Your words didn't confuse them, they overwhelmed them. People don't reject futures they understand, they reject futures they can't imagine. You weren't trying to convince anyone, you were describing what felt obvious to you. That's what made it worse. You spoke calmly about things that would have required them to reinvent themselves just to understand. So they dismissed it, labeled it unrealistic. Safer to doubt you than to question the ceiling they'd accepted. Now, fast forward. Your life starts unfolding in the exact direction you talked about. Slowly, then all at once. And suddenly, they're stuck with an uncomfortable truth. Nothing you said was impossible, it was just outside their range. Their disbelief wasn't proof you were wrong, it was proof they were boxed in. That's the sting. You didn't outwork them loudly, you out-imagined them quietly. And now reality is siding with you, forcing them to confront the cost of thinking small. You didn't try to expose them, you just spoke freely, and that was enough to make their limits visible. Number 5, they couldn't see your upgrade, so they assumed nothing changed. They judged what was visible and missed everything that mattered. They didn't believe you for one simple reason. They were blind to the part of your growth that actually counted. They saw the same face, the same name, the same environment, and assumed the same person was standing there. What they didn't see were the late nights where your mind rewired itself. The quiet, internal battles where old limits got dismantled one by one. The decisions you made when nobody was watching that slowly replaced the version of you they thought they knew. Growth doesn't announce itself. It upgrades silently. People who live on the surface think change should look dramatic right away. New titles, new money, new status. When those things didn't appear instantly, they assumed nothing was happening. They mistook patience for stagnation and silence for weakness. Meanwhile, the real work was happening underneath, where opinions can't reach. Imagine this, a building being reinforced from the inside. From the street, it looks the same. Same walls, same windows. But internally, the foundation is being strengthened, the structure rebalanced, the weak points removed. One day pressure hits, and while everything else cracks, that building stands. That's when people finally notice. Too late. Real growth is invisible until it's unignorable. They never saw the nights you questioned yourself and kept going anyway. They never felt the fear you learned to sit with. They never noticed how your reactions changed, how your tolerance dropped, how your focus sharpened. They judged your words based on old data, outdated information, a version of you that no longer existed. That's why your confidence looked misplaced to them. They were measuring you by the past while you were operating from an internal future. And now comes the shift. What was invisible is becoming obvious. Your decisions land differently. Your presence carries weight. Results start appearing without explanation, and suddenly their judgment feels embarrassing. They realize they underestimated a process they never bothered to look at. They laughed because they couldn't see the work. Now they're quiet because they can't ignore the results. You didn't change overnight. You changed where it counts. And now the surface finally reflects the depth they ignored. Number 6. You weren't showing off. You were shedding a skin that was already dead. They called it ego because they couldn't admit it was escape. Let's clear this up cleanly and violently. You weren't bragging, you weren't flexing, you weren't trying to sound important. You were breaking out of a version of yourself that had become too small to breathe in. And whenever someone refuses to stay trapped where others feel comfortable, it gets mislabeled fast. They said you were talking too much, that you were moving ahead of yourself, that you should stay humble, but what they really meant was, stay familiar so we don't have to adjust how we see you. Your words weren't loud, they were liberating. You spoke because staying silent felt like suffocation. Imagine this. A person locked in a room for years finally pushes the door open and steps out. From the outside, it looks sudden, dramatic, unnecessary, but from the inside, it was survival. That's what your speaking was, not ego. Oxygen. Bragging seeks attention. Liberation seeks space. They judged your voice without understanding the pressure behind it. They didn't feel the discomfort of pretending to be someone you'd outgrown. They didn't carry the weight of holding back thoughts that no longer match the old version they remembered. Speaking was the release valve, the moment you chose growth over approval. Of course, they called it premature. Courage always looks premature to people who wait their whole lives for permission. You didn't wait. You declared yourself done with shrinking, and that declaration made them nervous. Here's the part that hits hardest. When you finally spoke, you weren't announcing who you wanted to become. You were acknowledging who you no longer were. That scares people, because it signals finality, no turning back, no more playing small for comfort. They mistook your freedom for arrogance because they're still negotiating with fear. Now that the results are showing, the narrative collapses. What they called bragging looks like honesty. What they called ego looks like alignment. What they called too much looks like exactly enough. You didn't speak to rise above them. You spoke to escape what was killing you. And once you break out of an old self, there's no apology owed to anyone who preferred you trapped. Number 7. You spoke before proof. And that quietly decided everything. The test wasn't whether it would happen. The test was whether you'd fold before it did. Here's the part nobody warned you about. When you spoke early, when you said things that didn't match your current reality, the universe wasn't judging your accuracy, it was watching your steadiness. Those words weren't a flex. They were a test disguised as confidence, a pressure point, a moment where most people backpedal the second doubt shows up. And doubt showed up fast. It came through side comments, raised eyebrows, awkward silence, people pretending not to hear what you said, others subtly challenging it, waiting for you to laugh it off, soften it, correct yourself. That was the test. Would you retreat to make them comfortable, or would you stand still inside what you already knew? You stood still. That's what separated you. Imagine this. You plant a flag in the ground before the land is claimed. Storms come. People mock the placement. Nothing's here, they say, but you don't move it. You don't argue. You don't explain. Months later, the land fills in around the flag, and suddenly it looks intentional, strategic, inevitable. Most people fail not because they're wrong, but because they can't sit in delay without doubting themselves. You didn't know it at the time, but every day you stayed aligned while nothing changed externally. You were building something unshakable internally. Consistency without applause. Belief without reinforcement. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from hype. It comes from depth. You might have wondered, why does this feel so heavy if I'm right? Because tests don't feel like victories while you're in them. They feel lonely, quiet, unsure. That's how they filter. And now look, things are unfolding, slowly, then undeniably. And the foundation holds because it was built during silence, not celebration. You passed the test the moment you didn't erase your own words. You didn't chase validation. You didn't rewrite your truth. You didn't abandon alignment to soothe doubt. And that's why what's happening now isn't fragile. It's earned. Number 8. They called it doubt, but it was really them losing control. They didn't question your vision. They panicked when they realized they couldn't steer it. Their disbelief was never about logic, timing, or realism. It was about control slipping through their fingers. As long as you hesitated, second-guessed yourself, or waited for approval, they felt comfortable. They knew where you fit. They knew how to talk to you. The moment you spoke with certainty, that comfort cracked. Your confidence disrupted the balance. People who rely on influence hate unpredictability, and nothing is more unpredictable than someone who stops asking for permission. You didn't rebel loudly, you simply stopped needing their agreement. That's when the tension started. That's when disbelief turned sharp, sarcastic, and personal. When people lose control over you, they call it concern. They framed their reactions as advice, as realism, as looking out for you, but underneath it was fear. Fear that you were stepping beyond their reach. Fear that their opinions no longer mattered. Fear that they couldn't slow you down with doubt anymore. Imagine this, someone holding a leash they didn't realize they had. You walk forward calmly, and it slips from their hand. They don't chase you. They stand there stunned, staring at the empty space where control used to be. That's what your certainty did. It removed leverage without a fight. Disbelief is what control looks like when it's threatened. Now here's the part that seals it. Your life has shifted beyond their influence. Decisions are being made without consulting them. Momentum is building where they can't interfere. And the worst part for them isn't that you're succeeding. It's that they can't stop it, slow it, or reshape it. They're forced into the observer seat now. Nothing scares controlling people more than watching a life they can't interrupt. You didn't push them away. You outgrew their reach. And now they're watching a reality unfold where their doubt has no authority, no weight, and no power. Number 9. You spoke before permission because you had already outgrown less. You didn't speak early because you were impatient. You spoke early because staying quiet felt like betrayal. This part cuts deep because it exposes something most people never admit out loud. You spoke early because somewhere inside you, the decision had already been made. Not a wish, not a hope, a decision. Long before proof showed up, long before circumstances caught up, you already knew one thing with brutal clarity. This wasn't the life you were meant to stay in. That knowing didn't come from ego, it came from self-respect, waking up. People around you thought you were reckless because they assume worth has to be earned slowly, painfully, with permission slips signed by struggle. You didn't see it that way, you felt it. You felt the mismatch between what you were tolerating and what you deserved. And once that awareness hits, silence becomes unbearable. Imagine this: you're wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. At first, you tolerate the discomfort. You tell yourself it's fine, but the moment you realize better shoes exist, every step starts to hurt more. Not because the shoes changed, but because your awareness did. That's what happened to you. You didn't suddenly become ambitious, you became honest. Once you know you deserve more, pretending otherwise feels like lying to yourself. That unseen version of you, the one nobody else noticed, had already drawn a line. It had already decided this was temporary. This was a chapter, not the book. When you spoke, you weren't announcing a dream. You were acknowledging an internal verdict that had already been reached. That's why doubt from others didn't stick. That's why criticism felt annoying but not convincing. They were arguing with a version of you that no longer existed. You had already moved on internally, and words were just the first crack in the old shell. They mistook necessity for recklessness. People call it premature when they don't realize you've already endured enough. You didn't wait for proof because proof was late. The knowing came first, and now that reality is finally adjusting, it's clear. You weren't ahead of yourself. You were done settling. Number 10. They bet on your past and lost to who you were becoming. They measured you by who you were. You were already operating as who you decided to become. This is where it finally lands, and there's no hiding from it anymore. They underestimated you because they froze you in time. They took an old snapshot of your life, your habits, your limits, and decided that was the full picture. They didn't bother to check for updates. They didn't notice the quiet work happening off stage. They assumed yesterday's version of you was permanent. That assumption cost them. While they were busy referencing your past, you were building forward. While they were confident you'd stay predictable, you were redesigning yourself in ways they couldn't track. They thought growth had to look loud, to be real. They forgot that the most dangerous upgrades happen quietly. Imagine this: someone watching the horizon through a rearview mirror. That's how they assessed you. They kept pointing at where you came from, not realizing you'd already changed direction. So when progress showed up, it didn't just surprise them, it embarrassed them. Underestimation is what happens when people confuse familiarity with limitation. They assumed you'd plateau, that you'd settle, that eventually you'd circle back to something smaller, safer, more manageable. And when you didn't, when results started stacking and momentum became undeniable, the gap between their assumptions and your reality hit hard. That gap is what they're struggling with now. You can feel it in their tone, the hesitation, the recalibration, the way they speak to you differently without acknowledging why. They're trying to reconcile 2 versions of you in their head, and it's not working. The old one doesn't explain the new reality standing in front of them. Nothing rattles people like realizing they misjudged someone who kept moving in silence. You didn't prove them wrong with arguments. You did it with progress, with consistency, with outcomes they can't talk around anymore. And the worst part for them is this: they can't rewind and adjust how they treated you back then. The window to underestimate you is closed. They bet on your past. You invested in your future. And now the difference is undeniable. Number 11. Your conviction shook their comfort, and they couldn't handle the noise. Your certainty wasn't loud. It was just impossible to ignore in a quiet, comfortable world. Here's the truth they never wanted to face. Your conviction didn't attack them. It disrupted them. It rattled the safety of lives built on predictability, routine, and low expectations. They weren't offended because you were wrong. They were offended because your confidence highlighted how carefully they had designed their lives to avoid risk. Comfort hates conviction. You moved with a sense of direction they didn't have. Not frantic, not desperate, calm, decisive. That kind of energy makes people uneasy because it exposes how much of their life is built around staying unchallenged. You didn't ask for reassurance. You didn't poll opinions. You trusted yourself, and that trust felt dangerous to people who survive by staying agreeable. Imagine this. Everyone else is floating in calm water, careful not to make waves. You start swimming toward shore with purpose. You're not splashing, you're not yelling, but your movement alone creates ripples. Suddenly, the water isn't still anymore. That's what your conviction did. It disturbed the illusion of safety. Predictable lives feel threatened by people who move with intent. They resisted you because your certainty forced a question they didn't want to answer. What if more was possible? What if comfort wasn't enough? Rather than face that, it was easier to label you unrealistic, intense, or too much. Resistance was their way of preserving peace, not truth. Now look at the shift. Your confidence didn't fade. It didn't collapse under pressure. It didn't need constant validation. It stood still long enough for reality to align with it. And now, what once felt threatening looks like foresight. What once felt reckless looks like discipline. Time turns conviction into evidence. They're watching now, quietly recalibrating, realizing your certainty wasn't noise, it was direction, and direction always outlasts comfort. Number 12. You spoke, and reality had no choice but to adjust. You didn't wait for life to agree. You spoke, and life had to respond. This is where it stops sounding poetic and starts sounding dangerous. Your early declaration wasn't wishful thinking. It wasn't optimism. It wasn't hope dressed up as confidence. It was instruction, calm, direct, and final. And the moment you spoke with that level of certainty, things started shifting behind the scenes, whether anyone noticed or not. Most people don't understand this part, so they call it luck later. They think movement starts after proof. That's backwards. Movement starts after conviction. When you spoke early, you weren't asking reality for permission. You were signaling readiness, and readiness triggers rearrangement. Imagine this. You flip a switch in a dark room. The light doesn't appear because you begged for it. It appears because the circuit was already connected. Your words were the switch. What came after was just electricity doing what it does. Quietly, inevitably. Certainty doesn't wait for confirmation. It creates conditions. That's why things began shifting in ways you couldn't explain. Delays here, openings there, people exiting your life without drama, opportunities appearing with strange timing. It wasn't chaos, it was reorganization. The universe clearing paths, removing friction, adjusting timelines to match the direction you locked into. Others thought you spoke too soon because they couldn't see the back-end work happening. They only judge what's visible. They don't understand that cause always moves before effect, that words spoken from alignment don't echo, they activate. What feels early to observers is often right on time for momentum. You didn't force outcomes, you forced honesty. You made it clear you weren't staying where you were. That clarity alone set events in motion. And now that proof is arriving, it looks miraculous to them. To you, it feels logical. You didn't speak early. You spoke precisely when movement was required, and reality listened. Number 13. You did what their world had never seen, and that's why they couldn't believe it. They didn't doubt you because it was impossible. They doubted you because it had never happened there before. This one cuts straight through the excuses. They didn't believe you because, in their mental history book, people like you don't rise. Not from that background, not from that position, not from that starting point. In their world, outcomes are recycled, not rewritten. You were supposed to fit the pattern, not break it. Their disbelief wasn't personal at first. It was statistical, habitual, lazy. They looked at where you started and assumed they already knew how the story ends. Same place, same ceiling, same limits. When you spoke differently, when you talked like someone who wasn't staying put, it sounded absurd to them. Not because it couldn't happen, but because they'd never seen it happen there. Imagine this. Everyone has only ever watched the sun rise from one direction. You point to the horizon and say, "It's going to rise over there." They laugh. Not because you're wrong, but because it challenges everything they've accepted as fixed. Your rise didn't fit their map. People confuse unfamiliar outcomes with impossible ones. That's the trap they fell into. They couldn't picture your success because it required rewriting their internal rules. It meant admitting that environment doesn't decide destiny, that origin doesn't dictate ending, that precedent isn't law. And rather than confront that, they chose disbelief. Now, here's the problem for them. You did it anyway, and now your existence forces a rewrite. The narrative they leaned on for comfort doesn't hold up anymore. Your progress becomes proof that their assumptions were never facts, just stories repeated long enough to feel true. The first one through the wall always gets doubted until the wall is gone. They don't know how to talk about it now. Your success doesn't just elevate you, it destabilizes the logic they've lived by. Because if you could rise from there, what does that say about everything they accepted without question? You weren't an exception, you were a disruption, and now the story has changed. Number 14. You weren't behind schedule, they were behind reality. They said you were late, but the truth is they were still catching up to the moment you'd already entered. This is where the final excuse collapses. They love to say your breakthrough took time, that it finally happened, that you arrived when things lined up. That's a lie that makes them feel better. Your breakthrough wasn't late. It landed exactly when it was supposed to. They were just slow to understand what they were witnessing. You were ahead of the curve while they were still debating whether the curve even existed. People who live by surface-level thinking assume timing is visible. Promotions, money, status, applause. They don't understand that real timing happens internally first. You entered the moment long before it showed on the calendar. By the time results appeared, you were already adjusted, already calm, already prepared. That's why it looks effortless now. Imagine this. Someone wakes up before dawn and starts moving while the city sleeps. Hours later, when the sun comes up, everyone else finally sees activity and assumes it just started. They don't realize how much ground was already covered in the dark. That was you. Being early always looks like being wrong to people who arrive late. They mistook your patience for delay. They mistook your silence for stagnation. They didn't realize you were waiting for the right moment, not permission. So when things clicked, when momentum showed itself, they called it sudden, overnight. Lucky. It wasn't. They were just late to the understanding. Timing isn't about when others notice. It's about when alignment locks in. Your timing was precise. Their perception was slow, and now that the gap is obvious, they're forced to rewrite their commentary. What once sounded like doubt now sounds like confusion. They can't explain how you passed them without announcing it. You didn't miss your moment, you entered it early. They just didn't recognize it until it was impossible to deny. And now you can feel it settling in. Not excitement, not shock, certainty. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. You weren't early by accident. You weren't loud for no reason. You spoke because you knew. And now reality has finished catching up. This wasn't luck. It was alignment, patience, and the discipline to stand still while everything rearranged. If this hit where it was supposed to, lock it in. Like the video, subscribe, drop 77 in the comments, and share this with someone who spoke early and paid the price for it. The ones who know will recognize it immediately.